Hi and welcome to the sew along for the zip up hoodie. So this hoodie is going to be probably the easiest zip up hoodie you've ever made. If you are nervous about putting in a zipper, don't be. We will take you through, I will take you through every step of this. So what are we going to need? Well, you're going to need some sort of medium weight fabric. So I'm using a Hatchier sweater knit. You could use French terry, you could use anything with about 40% stretch, merino, a nice maybe a 200-225 weight merino would work well. You're also going to need a detachable zipper, so that means a zipper that separates at the bottom. Because mine's two-way, it's got zips, pulls top and bottom. Because of COVID, I'm struggling to get zips the right length. So what I've done is I'm going to shorten my 60 centimeter zipper to be a 55 centimeter zipper. I will put a separate video up on how to shorten these separating zippers. You can do it with metal teeth or the plastic teeth, actually they're nylon, but whatever you want. So if you have a zipper that's too long, we can still use it, don't worry about that, that's fine. The other thing you're going to need is hemming tape, and this is to make putting in our zipper easy. Also, because of COVID, I'm struggling to get stretch hemming tape. So what I've done, and this does work really well, is I've cut strips of fusible interfacing, and I'm going to use that instead. It's really just to stabilize the area when we're putting the zip in, and it just makes the zip so much easier to work with. The other thing you're going to need is well, I'm using an overlocker. I'm using 4 threads of colour in my overlocker. The seams are 6mm, 1/4 inch, and we're not going to trim off any extra thread. But you're going to need a way of hemming this. So you could use a twin needle or a cover stitch machine, and or you could just use one of your stretch stitches on your plain sewing machine. So you don't have to have an overlocker, you can use a domestic machine for this construction. If you are using a home sewing machine, just make sure you choose one of the stretch stitches. I have videos on that. Lightning bolt stitch or a zigzag works really well. Okay, so let's get started. Before we get started, we need to stabilize the center front where the zip is going to go. So this is my front piece, and I've turned it upside down, one of my fronts. And what you need to do is cut a piece of fuse according to the measurements, and we're going to fuse that to the center front edge like this. Now, it's really important that the fabric fits to the fuse. Don't cut extra fuse, don't you have to make it work basically. So you have to make sure, if your fabric has stretched, you have to make sure you push it back into place. To get the zip to fit correctly, we need a stable knit. If your knit is not so stable, this is how we're going to stabilize it. So whatever you do when you fuse this, make sure, well, you don't want it bobbly, but you want to make sure when you're fusing it that that fits exactly. So I'm going to go to my iron now and press those into place and move forward. Let's sew the shoulders. So here is my back, and I want to put that right sides together to the front pieces, matching the shoulder seams. So these are the pieces that we've just put the fuse down the center front on. If you have access to clear elastic, which goes by the trade name Mobilon usually, it's a really good idea to include this now in this shoulder seam here. I'm not going to, because this knit is relatively stable, but if you do have access to it and you like to do that, this is a good seam to do that in. I might try putting up a separate video on installing Mobilon at a later date. So when you have that shoulder matched together, and it is a long one because these are drop shoulders, serge overlock that together. We are sewing at 6mm, 1/4 inch. We are not cutting any extra fabric off. once you've sewn that shoulder seam into place, go ahead and match the other shoulder seam and sew that into place as well. Now we're going to sew in our sleeves. So open up this armhole area and the seam we've just sewn, the shoulder seam. When you take one of your sleeve pieces, and they're the same because they've been cut on the fold, right at the centre of the top there's a notch. So that notch there will match to that centre top position. So all we're going to do now is overlock serge the sleeves into place, making sure that that centre notch matches and that the seam faces towards the back of the garment. And go ahead and repeat that on the other side. Now we're going to move on to doing the underarm and side seam. So take that sleeve and fold it right sides together from the wrist area. And we're going to overlock tidy serge from the wrist up through the underarm. There's a notch to match as you go, and then we're going to serge all the way through to the hemline. Make sure that those seams at the underarm point face towards the back, and if you're needing a serge finish, overlock finish on the wrist area, do it now. I'm going to use my cover stitch machine to do my hem, so I'm going to skip that. But some of you might prefer to just tidy up that raw edge. If your fabric is especially bulky, you might want to make sure at the underarm seam that those seams face in different directions. And go ahead and repeat that on the other side. Now we're working on the hems, so I've gone to my iron and I've pressed the hem at the wrists at 2 centimetres, 3/4 of an inch, and I've done the same at the hemline here. So I've set up my cover stitch to do my hems. You could use a twin needle on a domestic machine or any one of your hemming stitches. And we're going to sew those hems into place. I'm using my 2 outside needles, and I made sure I did a test stitch on spare fabric before I begin. So when you're ready, we're going to stitch. Now from the very edge, it's really important that we get a nice start and finish to this. So just take your time and put those hems into place. And when you're ready, go ahead and hem the sleeves as well. I have managed to find a zipper the correct length, so I'm going to just change out the zipper that I showed you earlier for this one. This is a nylon zipper, the main reason being that this one's a lot lighter than that metal one I had. Okay, so let me show you how to install a separating zipper for this garment. So first things, place your garment right side up, and the reason we do this is because it's really easy to get these sides of the tape mixed up. So place your garment right side up with the centre in the centre, and then place your zip right side up as well. So what we're going to do now is separate the zipper. So literally just unzip it and detach it at the bottom. All you're going to do now is turn the zipper over. So what we have is right sides together, and before you go any further, take a pin or a clip and hold it into place. It's a good idea to put a couple of pins in just to make sure that one doesn't fall out. Alright, so I'm going to start working on the right side as you wear it. So you can let that just fall out, and we just want one layer of fabric now. Okay. So at the bottom we've already completed our hem, so we want the bottom of this zipper to be in line with the folded finished edge, and I'm going to hold that into place with a pin, and I'm going to put the raw edge there against the tape edge here. Now generally separating zippers have a 3 centimetre gap, and you'll notice, long story short, I've allowed 1 centimetre to sew it in, so this just allows us the space here to stitch this in the correct place. So we want the bottom of the zipper to be right on the fold, and at the top edge here we want the distance between the top stop and the raw edge to be 6mm, 1/4 of an inch. Now if you need it to be a teeny bit more, like a centimetre, 3/8 of an inch, that's fine, but don't let it go any more than that, or you end up with a big gap between your hood. Okay, so we'll pin that into place as well, and you can see that's right on the edge, and there's my fuse tape. So what we do now is place that flat and pin it into position, and we have used the fuse tape to stabilize that seam, so this should be really straightforward. And just pin that together at various places. So once you've done one side, go ahead and do the other side. Just zip the zipper pull out of the way while you're pinning. Right, so once you've got enough pins into place, what we're going to do is go to our plain stitcher, and we're going to tack stitch the zip into place. Now you don't really need to, but I am going to make my stitch slightly longer than normal, and I'm just going to double check the beginning position when I start. So I'm stitching this at, what I'm doing is I'm leaving about a 5mm, 6mm gap. Depending on the machine you have, you may or may not need to change your foot out for a zipper foot. Generally you won't need to, because what we need to do is just leave a slight gap beside the teeth here. We don't want to jam in our stitches. It's not an invisible zip. We don't want to jam it all the way in. We want to leave about well, around about 5mm, 1/4 inch. You can leave less, it really is personal preference. I am going to back tack because I just want to make sure everything here is nice and secure. It's handy that I have a commercial machine, and the distance on the foot here is 5mm, 1/4 inch to the centre. So all I'm going to do is just make sure that that raw edge of fabric matches my raw edge of my tape, and I'm just tacking this down. And this will just help remove any of the, what's the word, like the tunnelling, the bobbling that can happen with knit fabrics. And hopefully that hem tape will help stabilise everything. Now if you do start to get a bit of tension there, what I'm doing is I'm just lifting the presser foot just to release some of the pressure in there, the tensions. You don't want to end up with a wavy zip. And so what we're aiming for at the bottom is the bottom of our puller to be exactly on the edge. And make sure you back tack this. I want it perfectly lined up like so. So you can see I've left a gap there of about 1/4 inch if you want to, and it really depends on your fabric, and I'll show you what we can do in a minute, but you could stitch that a lot closer too, depending on what you're using. If you're using something like this, which is a poodle fur or Sherpa, clearly you'd want to leave more gap, but we can play with that when we go to top stitch it down. This is just literally a holding stitch at the moment. So when you've done one side, go ahead and do the other side. Now this is going to feel really odd, but I'm actually going to sew it top down. Normally you don't have the bulk of the fabric on this side. What I don't want to happen is the seam runs to end up wrong. Often the seam run is when you when you start to sew a garment, you sew all the seams in one direction. So you generally sew everything from, say, the neck to the hem, or the waist to the hem. It's not a good idea to sew one seam the opposite direction. That's called the seam run. So it's probably just a little bit more important when you're putting in something like a zipper pull, because this is the centre of the garment and it's really going to be seen. So I'm going to, yes, you don't normally back tack when you're doing a tacking stitch, but I'm just going to make sure nothing moves. I want this to be really nice. So we're just repeating it on the other side. So there's no need to overlock this raw edge in here. You can if you want to. The main reason is it's going to be hidden by the zipper tape. The other thing is we have put fusible stabilizer in there, and as a matter of course, knits don't tend to run like well, they don't like wovens do. They can ladder, but that wouldn't matter either because this is on the grain line. Okay, so what we're going to do now, if you come to the area where the zip is, the best thing to do is to stop with your needle down just above the zip, and then lift your presser foot up, and then just pass that zipper pull back up the other side of it, and then pop your presser foot down and continue stitching in a straight line. And yet again, when we end up at the bottom, just make sure that the bottom is lined up exactly, because we want a beautiful finish to the bottom of our garment. And don't forget to back tack again. Okay, so I'm just going to pop my stitch length back to normal, and just remember, if you are using a plain sewing machine, don't forget to make sure there's a ball or stretch needle in your machine. So now I am going to stitch down the fabric to my zipper tape. So this gives you an option. You can either just use that nice straight edge as your guide, or if you want it closer, you can push that over. Often a good idea, if you do want it closer now, is just go back and run another line of stitches the distance you want. You could change your regular foot out for an invisible zipper foot and just control the distance you want. It is really going to depend on the thickness of your fabric and the look you want. So you could use a twin needle and run 2 stitches down here if you want. I'm just going to run a single line of stitches down, and I'm going to run the single line of stitches down maybe, it's probably 1/8 of an inch away from that fold edge, because I want to have that black showing in the center of my garment. It depends what you like. You could have it all the way over there. You just don't want the fabric interfering with the function of the zipper. So because that tack line of stitches has given me a really nice straight line, I'm now going to stitch it down, and just to make it sure it has extra stability when I stitch, as I said, I'm going to do it around about 1/8 of an inch. I'm just stitching it so that the stitches are going to remain on the tape width. Just like before, if you see any sign of bunching, what you can do is just lift up that presser foot and just release any of the tension. But hopefully you won't, because you've used either fuse or stabilizer tape in there. Now I want to make sure my end's really tidy. See how we finished it on the edge there? So just make sure that's just perfect when you're coming up to it, so that the top is just covering the underneath, and don't forget to back tack. Okay, so we've now done one side. We'll go ahead and repeat that on the other side. And yes, sewing us from the top down on this side is against all the standard rules. You generally never have bulk of your fabric on the right. I just find it often ends up with a better result. It's one of the very few times I will do this. So I'm approaching my zipper pull, so I'm going to stop with the needle down, lift the presser foot, just slide the zipper pull out of the way, put my presser foot down and continue stitching. Alright, so now I'm going to move on to the hood. Now we're going to work on the hood, and first things first, we're going to serge overlock together this long curved edge that has the 2 notches in it. Now I'm going to overlock tidy the long straight edge, which is going to be the face opening edge. Now this is because I'm not going to cover stitch my hood down. Before we overlock this hood into place, I'm just going to run a little tack stitch to make sure my beginning and my end are really tidy. So this will probably start to become clear as to why I like to leave a small gap here now. So place your hood right side together to your garment. So this is the right side as if you were wearing it of the body, and this is the hood. So match the notch of the hood to the folded edge here at the top center of the garment, and then wrap the excess around to create a sandwich, if you see this, of the tape. So what happens now, because I left that small gap, that means the overlocked edge or the serged edge of the front of the hood will match exactly with the edge of the tape there. Can you see that? So I'll just quickly tack stitch that into place through the tape line. So I'm just tacking it at 6mm, 1/4 of an inch, just to show you what's going to happen. You see how I've done that there? So after this is stitched into place, what this does, and you don't have to do it like this, but it just creates a really smooth, tidy transition when this is, say, just slightly open and you can see the inside of the garment. It makes it really, really tidy. Now it doesn't mean you can't cover seam that into place if you want to through the hood. You certainly can. It just gives you a few more options. So that will help our beginning and end of our overlocking. And I'm just going to find the other end of my hood, making sure it's still all right sides together, and I'm going to do the same on the other side. You could pin it into place, you don't have to you don't have to tack stitch it. This just sort of eliminates any movement for me. So there we go again. I'm placing that notch edge there against there, and I'm wrapping this around, just making sure all those edges are even. And because our zipper tape has excess tape at the top, that's fine, we'll trim it off later. Just tack stitch that down like that. So now I'm going to move over to my serger and we're going to serge this into place. When I serge the hood in, I like to do it with the hood on top and the garment underneath. And I am going to let my blade cut off this extra tape on the top. You can trim it back flat with your scissors if you prefer, if you're worried about your blade. So just double check that our lovely tack stitching is holding everything into place and it's all looking nice. And of course this little fold back will also hide any mess at the beginning and end of your stitching too. My overlocker doesn't like this. I'm going to go away and trim that off and come back. Does not like that at all. Now as we serge round, we have notches to match to our shoulder seam and our centre back. So I'm just going to preempt this end and cut that off flush. So at the beginning and end, that will fold back and create that lovely transition like so. Okay, so when I turn the hood through, so here's the right front of my garment and my hood, what I've got is this really lovely transition on the inside here. Just, it's really tidy. All the mess of the beginning of the overlocking is in the seam. It does stick over here, but I actually think that looks really nice. And as I mentioned, I'm not going to use my cover seamer for this, but you could. The reason I'm not going to is because I want to line up my stitching on the front with my stitching now. So, and because this edge here is not under any pressure, you can get away with just using a straight stitch on it if you want. I mean, you could use a slight zigzag or a lightning bolt. I just really want to make sure that that line there transitions beautifully up here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and press this into place before I stitch a seam in it. The hem patterned allowed for on the hood is 2 centimetre 3/4 of an inch, but because we've lost 1/4 of an inch, 5mm here, I've pressed in a 1.5 centimetre, which is, oh, I think it's 9/16 of an inch. I'll have to work that one out and put it below, just to make sure that that is all correct. So what I'm going to do is just line up my stitching with the stitching on the centre front, which is exactly on my 1.5 centimetre line, and I'm going to stitch my hood down. And effectively what I'm doing is just stitching my hood down through the overlocking line, the serging line. So of course you could also use a twin needle to sew that. You could sew a second line of stitching, you could use your cover stitch, just whatever you prefer, and also just like that our garment is finished. So thank you so much for joining me. This is a really quick sew if you just want something that's quite effective for an easy throw on athleisure wear type jacket in the weekends, or just to go for a walk over leggings and a tank top. So if you like what you see, please hit the like button and the subscribe button, and as always, thanks for buying my patterns, thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you again next time.